Good evening, everyone. Good evening to all of you, and welcome to Congregation Emmanuel for this timely and important conversation. I understand that there is quite a bit of lingering rush hour traffic, and I suspect there will be more folks who are joining us in the next few moments, but we want to get started and be respectful of your time and be respectful of our speakers' time, so we're going to begin. This year marks the 150th anniversary of my great-great-grandfather's immigration to the United States. He came from Harburg, Bavaria, in search of a better life, free from persecution and discrimination. He made his way to that haven of locations for immigrants, Colorado, during the gold rush. While the non-Jews came out looking for gold, the Jews quickly realized that they were not cut out to be miners. So my great-great-grandfather opened a dry goods store. He eventually became one of Colorado's leading merchants and philanthropists. 150 years ago, this country gave my great-great-grandfather a gift. It was the gift of a dream, the gift of hope, the gift of possibility. Was his life here easy? Absolutely not. Did he face discrimination and bigotry? Most assuredly. But he was given a chance to live his version of the American dream. It is a dream that could not have existed anywhere else in the world for a Jew in 1870. I am here as the direct result of that dream. The privileges I enjoy are the dividends of a dream that America gave my great-great-grandfather. We are a people who have known the story of immigrants, not only because most of our families arrived in this country in various ways and at various times over the last few centuries, but also because from its first inception, Judaism was the faith of migrants. Our story begins with God telling Abraham to leave his father's homeland and journey to a new place, a place of promise. And it is only 3 generations after his family settles in that promised land that they have to leave and journey to Egypt, where they find themselves oppressed and enslaved. As much as our faith was born in the promised land, it was forged in Egypt. Ours is a faith of what Langston Hughes calls the dream deferred. Ours is a faith of longing, of hoping, and most importantly, of wandering. The vast majority of the Torah takes place outside the promised land. In the last verses of Deuteronomy, we are still on the wrong side of the Jordan River, still waiting to cross. Our story is more of homelessness than home. 36 times the Torah commands that we welcome the stranger because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. In a book that does not waste a single word and where repetition is a sign of emphasis, there is no parallel to this commandment. Over and over and over again, we are reminded that our job is to welcome others who have wandered as we have. And why must we be reminded again and again? Because it is easy to forget when we are sitting in the comfort of the promised land. It is so easy to close the door behind us without even thinking. The Torah commands constant vigilance lest we succumb to complacency. We were strangers then, and so we are called to identify the strangers of today and welcome them. Our work here tonight is an answer to this call. Though immigration is in the news constantly, I fear that few of us understand in deep ways the issues that are being discussed. Our nation's immigration system is almost incomprehensibly complex. If it is difficult for even native English speakers to understand, how much more so daunting and difficult the task for folks for whom the immigration system is set out to serve or fails to serve. We are in a moment of heightened tension about immigration where rhetoric is often divorced from facts. The migrant crisis is real and getting worse due to a combination of factors, some of which you'll hear about tonight, including new changing crises that drive people from their homes, destabilizing forces here and abroad, and the haphazard response from government and organizations. There are more refugees on Earth in 2020 than there have been in any time in human history. If there was a moment to heed the Torah's 36-fold call, that moment is now. Tonight's panel seeks to help you to understand immigration, both legal and illegal, so that we can cut through the rhetoric and expand our understanding. Tonight's discussion is not intended to be an end unto itself, but rather one part of an ongoing conversation and series of actions. I am grateful to our synagogue's brotherhood and sisterhood for the initiative in bringing this program to our congregation and for inviting me to participate in it. Being a part of these consequential and deeply Jewish conversations is a central part of our congregation's mission and vision. I am excited to learn with you more about this unique moment in history and to reflect together about our collective Jewish response. So I want to tell you a little bit about the plan for the evening. We've invited 3 speakers to speak on different subjects this evening. They'll each present for about 15 minutes. I'll introduce each one of them before they speak, but for now, so you know the scope of the evening, Gordon Kwan will talk about understanding legal immigration to the United States. Then Tatiana Obando will talk about understanding the migrant crisis. And then Brett Pearlman will speak about understanding the impact of immigration on the city of Houston and on the country as a whole. After all 3 of them have had the chance to present, we'll have a good chunk of time, we hope, for question and answer. And after I'll wrap up a bit, and then we'll invite you to join us in the North Lobby for dessert after that. As you came in this evening, we hope that you received some note cards and a small pencil if you didn't already have something to write with. We want to make sure that we get a variety of questions. So if you have questions as all 3 of our speakers are speaking, please be sure and write them on the cards. And some of our hosts for this evening from Brotherhood and Sisterhood will be walking through the room periodically to gather them, and I will do my best to curate them. If your question is targeted at one particular of our speakers, please feel free to indicate that, or if it's for all of them, that's helpful to know too. So with that, I am going to introduce the first of our speakers for this evening. Gordon Kwan will be speaking about understanding legal immigration to the United States. He's been practicing U.S. immigration and nationality law for over 40 years. He is board certified in the field by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. He is a founding member and former chair of the immigration section of the State Bar of Texas. Gordon also served as the chair of the Texas chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and served on its national board of directors. Gordon was selected by the Texas Lawyer magazine for its Lifetime Achievement Award. He previously served as Houston City Council member and Mayor Pro Tem. Please join me in welcoming Gordon.
Thank you, Rabbi, and if I could just share for a few minutes my family story too, because I'm so inspired. I know everyone has a story. My grandfather came to the United States during the Chinese exclusion period, when Chinese were specifically found to be unworthy to be Americans. He first went to Mexico, worked at a laundry in Ciudad Juarez, and by chance, the earthquake happened in San Francisco in 2004. And he went back to his village, and lo and behold, people said he was born in San Francisco and could become a U.S. citizen. So he got his papers, and that's how our family got started here. So, you know, we all have different things in our past history. Sometimes by hook or by crook, we made it to the United States. But today we're going to talk about how legal immigration works, and I'll tell you, it hasn't changed much in the last 30 years, actually. You see so much in the paper about all these things that President Trump is trying to do, but if we look at what the principles of immigration are, hopefully you'll have a better understanding of how the system works or is not working. So let's go here. So the 3 principles we have always worked on are 1, family reunification, 2, labor market needs, and 3, humanitarian concerns that the country should be sharing. So I'll take each of them. Family reunification. So the idea is that if you're a citizen, you should be able to bring your spouse, your unmarried minor children, your parents, and so those are considered immediate relatives. There's no limit, no quota on these people. You can sponsor them for immigration at any time. After that, we have different preferences. There's 4 preferences. The first preference are unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens over the age of 21. Second preference are if you're a permanent resident sponsoring your spouse or unmarried minor sons and daughters. Third are married sons and daughters. And fourth are brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens. Again, I have kind of a listing of the categories and how many visas are available under each. Under the family situation, we have approximately 320,000 visas that should come every year, but immediate relatives, that first group, is uncapped. So visas are always available for the spouse, mother, father, or unmarried minor children of U.S. citizens. Every month we get from the State Department a visa bulletin that tells us how fast or slow they're working on visas. Again, immediate relatives, there's no cap, so they're not listed. But if under the first preference, you're a U.S. citizen, you're sponsoring an unmarried son or daughter over 21, in the month of February of 2020, they're working on cases from August of 2013. So you see there's like a 7-8 year wait for them to come to the United States. If you're sponsoring your brother or sister under the fourth category, they're working on cases from 2006. So that then would be a 14-year wait. Married sons and daughters, 2007. So you see the long waiting line. There are current visas for spouses of permanent residents and their unmarried children under 21. So that category is currently available. So that's where most people think of immigration. Immigration based upon family members who can sponsor them. In my practice, I look at a lot of people who's based upon their skills. So let's go to labor market needs. This is kind of, it seems like a lot of information here. Let me just try to break it down. Before somebody can come to the country, we want to make sure that they're not displacing an otherwise qualified U.S. worker. So we don't want to bring in workers that would displace Americans from a job. So there's a process we call labor certification that we go through, and I'll go through that in a few minutes. But that's kind of the essence of what we're looking at. Today, as you know, we have the lowest unemployment rate in the last 50 years, and I think Brent or Tatiana will talk about that. That we actually need workers all over the place, at every level. So let's look at what kind of workers there are. The first group are really high-skilled workers. If you want a Nobel Prize or an Oscar or something like that, we definitely want you. You think we do. I'll get to that in a minute. Outstanding professors, researchers, international executives from who work for companies overseas and come here. The second group are people with advanced degrees, master's, PhDs. Exceptional ability shows that they're not only have these advanced degrees, but they're recognized as exceptional in their field. And things in the national interest waivers, that you can show that your skill will be in the interest of the United States. Somewhat subjective, but a lot of people qualify under this. We've done outstanding, we've done teachers who were teaching STEM work to minority students. We're working right now on a Pakistani gentleman who headed up the anti-terrorist activity in the Northwest Territory against the Taliban and how his knowledge can be of help to the United States. The third preference are the most common. Okay. These are people with at least a bachelor's degree or 2 years of education or experience. The next category is other worker. These don't even require 2 years of experience. It could be no experience, no education. Fourth preference are religious workers and special categories we have. And you may have heard, it didn't make it in this chart, let me see. Nope. The fifth preference are people who invest money in the United States. You may have heard of that. If they invest at least $900,000 in a targeted employment area or $1.8 million and create 10 jobs for U.S. workers. So these are our employment-based categories. Now let's look at the quota for that in February. C's, all across the board almost in every category. Current, there's no waiting line. There's more visas than there is demand for visas, except for 2 countries, China and India. have backlogs, very long backlogs. There's a little backlog from the Philippines for maybe a couple of years. But virtually all countries in the world, we can take workers from, Mexico included, you name it. Israel, we need them. So the key thing is like, okay, we have this backlog under the family quota, but we have visas current under the employment quota. So your natural response is, how do I get into the employment quota so I can get here faster? So as I mentioned, there's this thing called labor certification, where we have to make sure that the job is being paid the prevailing wage rate. We have to advertise in the newspaper. We have to advertise at the Texas Workforce Commission. We have to post notice at an employer's place of business. And we have to show that we made a good faith effort to look for U.S. workers and then file a request to the Department of Labor to get the certification. This process does take about 9 months to a year, but once it's certified, then the person can apply for an immigrant visa under the appropriate category. And if they had entered the United States legally, they never worked without permission, they always maintain a legal status, they can adjust their status here in the United States from that non-immigrant status to an immigrant visa status. Now, if they didn't do that, then they'd have to go back to their home country to do the interview. And that's where the rub is on many people. Many people have come here, overstayed their visa, maybe worked without permission, things of that nature. And under our laws now, as of 1996, if you're overstayed by 6 months, once you leave, you have a 3-year bar before you can come back. If you overstayed by a year, for 10 years you can't come back. Now, there are waivers in limited cases. If your mother or father is a permanent resident or citizen, they can ask for a waiver of that, or if you're married to a citizen. So this is basically how our employment categories work. I've gone to different groups, and people say, oh, I have this friend, and they're really smart, and I want to help them. What can I do? Well, the main thing is find a job for them if they have a skill. And you may say, well, what skill do they have? Honestly, we're working with people from places like Subway Sandwich, Jack in the Box, janitors, busboys. I said the other worker category is current. A lot of people don't know that. They think you have to be a nuclear scientist or have a master's degree or something else. But it's possible to do that, to do this and show that you're not displacing a U.S. worker and that you have a job here and that you'll actually work in that field. You don't have to work there the rest of your life, but you have to work there for a period of time to show that it's a sincere job. Humanitarian concerns is probably what you see most in the newspaper. Asylum. What does asylum mean? A lot of people say, I can't go back to my home country. Oh, things are horrible back in my home country. Well, the United States has signed a treaty in 1980, dealing with the Refugee Act. And it defines that you have to be outside of your home country, but you fear persecution based on one of these grounds. Either your race, your religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So if you said, I had a fight with my neighbor and he's threatened to kill me, yeah, maybe you don't want to go back to your home country, but that's not one of the grounds here. It has to be because of one of these 5 enumerated grounds. And you have to show a well-founded fear of persecution or past persecution that has happened to you. What Trump has done recently is saying that you have to apply in the first country you get to. You can't just say, I want to go to the United States and apply. And that's what we've seen for a long time. So people pass through Mexico, they pass through other countries, and they come to the United States and apply for asylum. So they have to show why they didn't apply in those other countries if they found safe haven there. Now, obviously, many people cannot find safe haven in Mexico. So once they're denied, then they could try the United States from there. Now, also, refugees, as the rabbi talked about, we have been a haven for refugees. The United States, and Texas in particular, and Houston in particular, and Texas, has taken in more refugees than any other city. And this year, Trump announced, instead of like the normal 100,000 refugees we were taking, He's limited to 18,000, which has been a dramatic drop in the number of refugees. So we have agencies, Catholic Charities, HIAS, YMCA International Services, neighborhood centers have been great in settling refugees in the Houston area. Houston's been a great place because the cost of living is fairly low, and also because of the fact that we have a lot of jobs for people. I just want to mention that there's also this U visa, T visa, and S visa. So if you hear of people who are trafficked, they can apply for a T visa to stay here because of that trafficking. People who are victims of crime can apply for a visa under that category too. And S are people who help the government break up smuggling rings or provide information on criminal cases. So I just want to mention, Andrew just gave me the flash. We only have a couple of minutes left. Some of the things that are happening recently that are really affecting immigration, the new public charge requirements. As of February 24th, they're adding an 18-page form that we had to complete, declaration of self-sufficiency that goes into things like what is your mortgage payment, how much did you make, what is your educational background, what is your credit rating. I mean, it goes into everything about you, and they're supposed to decide, is that person likely to go on public charge? And this is just going to be a real bear for a lot of people to complete. We've heard about the Stay in Mexico protocol, which has been a disaster also. That instead of being allowed to stay in the United States, as it has been in the past, waiting for your hearing, you have to stay in Mexico, and the approval rates are abysmal. Right now, our immigration courts have a backlog of almost 1 million cases. Here in Houston, they're adding 2 more courts. We should have about 20 judges coming up in the near future. And I was talking to Barbara earlier that one of the things that we see a lot now is even people coming on temporary working visas. Trump has this policy called Hire America, Buy America, BAHA is what we call it. And it's making even a professional person questioning, like, why do you need this person? Why is that degree required? Even if they've approved the case previously, they're going back and denying the second time when you're filing for an extension. It is making it more difficult than ever. As you also know, there's a banned immigrant country list. There's 13 countries in which a travel ban has been imposed. Nigeria is one of them recently, and we have a very large Nigerian population here. So I think that there's basically a second wall. If you can get over the first wall of trying to get a visa, then there's the second wall of processing your case with immigration. There's a long waiting line in all these cases, and so even people who've done things right often get frustrated by the long wait it takes just to get through the system. So I hope tonight it just gives you kind of an overall understanding of how our system works. That basically, is that the signal, Andrew? Okay, but that 3 principles again: family unification, labor market needs, and humanitarian concerns. How we break those down are this way. How we look at visas is based upon how many visas are available every year. 320,000 based upon family, 140,000 based upon employment, 16,000 for refugees, and 10,000 a year on asylees. So that kind of gives a broad overview of how the process works. So I look forward to your questions about how you can be of help to others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Just a reminder, if you have questions, to please write them on the cards and indicate if they are for a particular speaker so that we can have a robust question and answer session. And it is now my honor to introduce Tatiana Obando, who's going to help us understand the migrant crisis, some of which you touched on, and I think we'll expand upon that, so thank you. Tatiana is the program director of RAICES, Qualified Representative Program, and also the managing attorney of the RAICES Houston office. She earned a law degree in Nicaragua, her country of origin, and has worked in numerous human rights agencies in Nicaragua, Ghana, Mexico, and the United States. She has a Master's of Law in International Human Rights Law from the University of Indiana. She is also has a specialization in public international law from the Hague Academy of International Law and International Human Rights from the University of Oxford. She has practiced immigration law since 2007, focusing her activities in asylum law, competency hearing for the mentally impaired, and removal proceedings, especially for individuals with elevated criminal backgrounds. In Houston, she led the legal orientation program for 4 years, serving the migrant population detained in 3 detention centers. In 2018, she led the RAICES project to initiate the offering of legal services to the migrant population in Houston and has managed that office ever since. So please welcome Tatiana.
Well, good afternoon. As you can see and hear, I am an immigrant myself. I'm here since formally 2010, not that I was informally here before. And now I'm working with RAICES. Oh my goodness, I hate this. I have the same problem everywhere, like speak up or go close to the microphone. So you didn't hear everything I said before? Nothing, okay, that's good. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about the migrant crisis. While preparing this presentation, I started looking from the international point of view. And one of the things that Andrew was mentioning during his opening remarks is it's very important to note again, and is we as human beings have been migrating since the beginning of time. We've had refugees since the beginning of time. And I think what changes is the attitude and the response that we have towards these people, right? One of the situations that we're facing right now is, since 2014, we've seen an increment in people who are turning themselves into, arriving to the United States, they're turning themselves into the Border Patrol, and that initiates a process with the immigration courts or with the immigration system. That's created, that's augmented the backlog in immigration courts. That's created a lot of chaos from the response of the government, and the government has responded in several and different ways and then tried different alternatives to what's happening and to what to do about this. What is creating these from their home countries, and I think that I was supposed to answer that, we don't know. There's changes, and we see people coming from very poor places. We see people coming from not so poor places. We see people coming from war places, right? Then at an international level, we see a lot of Syrian refugees. At a local level, in America, at the continent level, we see people coming from Venezuela. And doing this research, right now there is more Venezuelan applicants, asylum applicants, than have ever been, than any other nationality, right? And why is that? Is because of what is happening in Venezuela, right? During the 80s, we saw a lot of Central American coming to the United States, and that was also a response to what was happening in Central America. And I think what is changing right now is the response that we are having towards this, and what are we doing for this? And let me see, where do I, here. So I wanted to present making sense of migration in an interconnected world. And this is at an international level, like a worldwide level. What is happening with migration? We have that 3.3% of the global population is considered a migrant. And this is as of 2015. I was looking at the 2020 report of the OIM, that's the Organization for International Migration. It's the same. It's 3.5% of the population who is migrating across the world. we have international displaced people, and migration is not something that is only international, right? It can be national migration. So we have internally displaced people. This is people who move within their countries because they're fleeing some sort of harm. And we have 22.5 million refugees. I'm going to discuss in a little bit what are refugees. Migration presents benefits to the country of origin and to the country of destination. Mr. Kwan was talking about how migrants can be skilled workers, right? And from there to genius people. But at the same time, these migrants are sending money back home, right? The employment rates diminish, in their home countries, the unemployment rate diminish in their destination countries. This is a very cool map that I found today, and it shows the percentage of migrant population in comparison to the national population. So in the United States, the percentage of the migrant population is 14.5% of the total population. Which I found very interesting is that in the UAE, the 88% of the population are migrants. And this is due to, it's a very small country, they have very little people, there's not many people, and there's a lot of migration due to oil and gas. Fascinating for me. Australia, 28% of the population are migrants. So I don't think we have a real problem with that. How can I click on the link? Sorry. This is a website from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and they are, it should be, it's the second page. Just scroll down. There you go. Okay, so this is again that there's 70 million people who have been forcibly displaced in their countries. We have, there's 37,000 displacements every day. There are 3.5 million asylum seekers in the world. In the United States, we have 254 asylum claims every year. 254,000, sorry. In Germany, they have 161,000 claims per year, and you can see that there's 81,000 refugees waiting for resettlement. And if you're ever interested in this, it is fascinating for me. You can just go to the UNHCR website, and you can find the places, the refugee camps. We can go back to the presentation, sorry. You can find the refugee camps and fascinating places where they do an amazing work for people. And they're waiting there, right? It's people fleeing war, people fleeing persecution, waiting there to be resettled in another country. So Mr. Kwan was telling today how the government decided to decrease the amount of refugees we're going to receive. This is a huge impact for them back in the refugee camps, where they're gonna have to be waiting for, I don't know, 10 more years probably, to have a place to go. Now, I was asked to talk about the difference between refugees, asylees, and migrants, and this is very important to understand what is happening at the border, at the southern border. A refugee is someone who's been forced to flee the war, and when I'm explaining this to my clients, I usually go back to World War II, right? Whoever was in a concentration camp, that is a refugee, right? The Refugee Convention was meant for these people. So, as Mr. Kwan said before, people who are fleeing crime in their countries. It's extremely sad, and we understand those situations. It's not a refugee, right? An asylum seeker is a person, or an asylee is a person who meets the definition of a refugee, but is present in the United States. So as I was saying before, a refugee will leave their country, will go to a refugee camp, and wait there to be resettled. An asylee will leave their country and come to the United States. Right, and apply for asylum there. The process can be quite complicated, but we do see claims working. And then an international migrant is a person who changes their country of usual residency. Right? They move from their country, they go to another country. Mr. Kwan was talking a little bit about the Migrant Protection Protocol, and these are the new changes, and this is what we're seeing right now at the border. This is a new action by the government in which if you are coming to the United States and you're trying to seek asylum, people usually come to the United States in two ways, I would say. One way is the legal way that we just heard about, and another way is I'm just moving, right? I just need to go. And usually what happens with these people is if they present themselves to an immigration officer at the border, they're going to be sent back home because you don't have a visa, you don't have a document that allows you to be in this country. But what happens with that is these people have the alternative to say, and because we are signatories of the Refugee Convention, have the alternative to say, I am afraid of going back to my country. That means I am a person who's been forced to flee my country, right? Because I'm suffering persecution, I have suffered or I will suffer persecution. I will be harmed if I go back. So what happens now is these people usually were allowed to remain in the United States while this was heard, while the process was conducted and they had a decision. Now the decision is you're going to have to wait outside the United States while we decide your case, while we see what's happening. Added to that, we have, the government is now signing something that is called Asylum Cooperation Agreements, and this is, so far we have 3 agreements with El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, in which people can wait in Mexico, but also, if they're not from Mexico, they can wait in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, as long as they're not from that country, right? So if you're from Honduras and you're coming to the United States and say, I'm afraid of going back to my country, you're gonna be sent back to Guatemala. If you are from El Salvador, or if you're from Guatemala, you may be sent back to El Salvador or Honduras, right? Why is this happening? We don't know. We don't know. But legally, what's happening is there's been a lot of legal changes on this. And what is happening is there's been 2 asylum bans. And this is, you're not allowed to apply for asylum. You will not receive asylum even if you meet the definition of a refugee. Why? The first one is if you came in through the southern border and you did not have documents, if you did not have a visa to legally enter the United States, you cannot apply for asylum. This has caused a lot of problem to us right now. We're working with a lot of people from Eritrea. We are working with a lot of people from the Democratic Republic of Congo, that they usually cannot get a visa to come into the United States. So they come illegally. And what happens is now we cannot apply for asylum for them, but we can try and apply for different type of protection. The second one is an Asylum Ban 2, which says that if you've gone through a third country, you cannot apply for asylum in the United States unless that third country has denied asylum to you, and unless that third country has, or you can suffer persecution in that third country, right? So we have people coming from Africa, and they usually travel to Ecuador. This is the route that we know of. So they go to Ecuador, and then they start coming up until the United States. Because they've crossed all these countries, they are not allowed to apply for asylum in the United States. They have to have applied for asylum in each of these countries or demonstrate that they will be persecuted in each of these countries. This is a huge challenge for us. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. But what we are doing right now is we are working with, as an organization, we are working with people who are waiting in Mexico. And what we do is we go down to the border and represent these people. Mostly our clients are right now Venezuelans and Cubans. We are also starting a new project with an organization in Guatemala, in which we're trying to screen for people who are on their way to the United States and could potentially face persecution in Guatemala and in their home country. And we're working also with them to screen people who are being sent back from the United States and see what we can do for them, right? Well, I think my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Our third speaker this evening, Freddie is walking around collecting your question cards. Please be sure and ask your questions as we will, after our third speaker, be moving into question and answer. Our third speaker for this evening is Brett Pearlman, who will be speaking some about understanding the impact of immigration on the city of Houston. Brett Pearlman's 25-year career has spanned senior positions in business, government, as well as corporate board work and service to his community. He is currently the CEO of the Center for Houston's Future, a nonprofit that focuses on developing consensus-based solutions to important social issues for the entire Houston region. Before his appointment, he was a fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and at the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative, an innovative program composed of experienced global leaders focused on developing new approaches to the world's most pressing social issues. Brett has also been recognized for his roles as a business person, corporate director, and public official in the energy and telecommunications industries. He holds advanced degrees in public policy from Harvard University and in law from the University of Texas. He was a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Northwestern University. Please help me welcome Brett Pearlman.
Well, one thing you didn't mention is this is my home congregation, so it's really quite an honor to be here speaking to you tonight about a project we've really been working on for the last 2 years. I started at the Center for Houston's Future really as a kind of my encore career in some ways. I had spent a number of years as a public official. I was on the Public Utility Commission, and then I had a consulting practice, and in 2016, when my kids went away to college, I just thought that sounded like a good idea, and so I did the same thing, and my wife, I don't see Cindy here somewhere. There she is. We spent a year at Harvard thinking about how to have an impact on our community and on the globe. And so I've been at the center now for 2.5 years. I came 25 days before Hurricane Harvey, and it's been quite an experience, I will say, in thinking about a whole host of issues that affect our community. And so if you haven't heard from us, before, we've been around for about 20 years. We spun out of the Greater Houston Partnership, which is, as many of you know, Houston's largest chamber of commerce. And we're really kind of a special organization. What we try to do is bring people together, bring businesses, government, and community stakeholders together, and to have a dialogue on very important issues facing our Houston region. And the way we try to do that is by putting facts on the table. So what I'm going to give you tonight is a few facts about immigration so that you can have a little bit of an understanding of how immigration is affecting our community. And then we can have a discussion on some of that. So that's my job. I'm not here, to tell you about the system. I think my two predecessors have done a good job on that. But really to think about immigration as an economic force. This is actually one of 3 projects we're working on at the center. We're working on this project to understand the economic impact on Houston's future, but we're also working on 2 other projects. One, which is a transition to a low-carbon energy economy. And so we're trying to figure out what does it mean for the energy capital of the world to become a leader in a low-carbon energy future as we start to transition to deal with climate change. And then the other project we're working on is what is the impact of our healthcare sector and the health of our community on our economic future. And we're getting ready to release a report on that subject in April. So stay tuned. You may be hearing a little bit about that coming up. Now, we picked these 3 issues because not only are they, let's see here. There we go. Not only are they important to our country, but they are some of our biggest challenges. And this is an op-ed that Chris Tomlinson, if you read Chris's column in the Houston Chronicle, he always has provocative things to say. So when he interviewed us for this, we weren't quite sure what he was going to say when the article came out. But what he did say was something that I think is true, that these issues are both important to our economic future, but happen to be the most partisan political topics facing our country. These are tough and pressing issues, and the future of Houston, Texas, and the United States relies on them getting it right. So this is kind of an awesome responsibility that we have at the commission, at the Center for Houston's Future, is to have this dialogue on these sort of issues that are important not only to our country, our city, but also to our country as well. And so what we, let's see, yeah, there we go. So what we have tried to do is tried to develop a new dialogue on immigration. And I don't know if any of you have heard, I know he's been here before, Stephen Kallenberg from RAICES. If you've heard him speak, he talks about Houston as the most diverse city in the country. And there's a lot of truth to that. I think we see that, you know, just in our daily lives, going to the grocery store or in our workplaces. We really are becoming a very diverse place. And as he talk about how we succeed in dealing with immigration in Houston is really going to be a model for how this goes, for better or worse, in the world. And so having this dialogue about immigration in Houston is important, not only for our economic future, but for the economic future of the United States. And so we started this journey in 2018 by gathering a bunch of information, to talking to a bunch of experts in the field, to conducting research, and then working with a bunch of stakeholders, and I'll show you that slide in a second. And about a year ago, we released a report, and you're going to see some of the findings from that today, called Houston's Economic Future Immigration. And so it synthesized some of our learnings and really some of the analysis that we've done. And really this was in some ways a groundbreaking report. It was one of the first reports in the country to look at the impact of immigration on a community. There's been a lot of research that's been done on a national level, but this was one of the first ones that has really looked at the impact on a particular city and region. And we've been off talking to people. Last year we did 25 meetings very similar to this, really to start to educate people on and to identify what some of the concerns are going forward. And now we're starting to work with a number of organizations. I was mentioning to Stuart before, we're working with an organization called the Bipartisan Policy Center out of Washington to start thinking about the impact of immigration reform on our communities. And we're going to be conducting a bunch of focus groups in the coming months to understand how do we get from where we are today to something that looks more like a reform of our immigration system. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're trying to move the needle on some of these issues by raising awareness like we're doing here tonight, putting some facts on the table, having a discussion, and then start thinking about where do we go in terms of solving this problem. Well, we haven't been doing this alone. We've been doing it with a number of partners. We've been working with national organizations like New American Economy, which is an interesting organization that works on this issue across the country, and the National Immigration Forum. And if you ever want to read, interesting, provocative articles, Ali Noorani, who is the executive director of the National Immigration Forum, if you just Google the name of the forum, you'll see some very provocative things. He's a really great writer and does a podcast that's really interesting, so I'd commend that to you. And then we've been working with a number of folks in the community, the Mexico Center at the Baker Institute, ADL, and the Houston Hispanic Chamber, as well as Houston Immigration and Legal Services. And finally, we've been working with an organization called the Rational Middle, and I'm going to show you some of that work at the very end. We've been producing a bunch of videos that try to take this very complex issue and make it simple. And so what we're going to see tonight is a little bit of work from the report that we did, and then maybe a little bit of a sense of one of the videos that Rational Middle has put together. And then at the very end, I'll give you the website for Rational Middle, and there's a lot more content there and a lot more, if you want to learn about a specific thing, more about refugees or asylees or the undocumented or high-skilled visas. There's resources there for you to look at and to learn more about some of these issues. So we're just going to get a taste tonight, and I'm going to start off by kind of telling you why we think this is an important issue for our city and our region. And the reason is because we're already a diverse city, but we're also a very fast-growing city, and I think all of us know this. And so if you look at the projected growth rate of the foreign-born population in Houston, and then you compare it to the growth rate of other places across the world, over the next 15 years, 16 years, so we use in our work 2036 as a baseline. Anyone know why we use 2036? It's the bicentennial of the city of Houston and the state of Texas. So kind of an interesting milestone to think about the future. A date not too far in the future that it seems like it's so far away, but also a date that gives us a little bit of running room to sort of project out and start looking at some of these trends. So if you looked at what's going to happen in terms of the growth rate of our foreign-born population in Houston, it's going to grow from about 1.6 million today to over 3 million by 2036, and that's about 100% growth rate. So we're going to, that foreign-born population is going to grow to 3 million in a city that's going to grow from about 6 million people to 10 million people by 2036. So you can start to see how this is going to have an impact on our region and our city more than almost any place in the country, and why it's important in Houston that we start to think about these issues. So that's why we did the report. Now, here are some of the things that we learned. And we're using some of the data from 2016, which was the most recent data, and then we're going to update this this year when the newer data comes out, newer census data comes out. But what we learned from this is that immigrants in the Houston region, and we define the Houston region, by the way, as the 9 counties in and around the city of Houston. What we found was that immigrants are about 23% of our region's population, but they're here to work, so they hold about 29% of the jobs. And they're really ingrained in our workforce. The share of foreign-born in our high-skilled workforce is about 42% of our doctors, about 43% of our scientists, and 42% of our petroleum engineers. And there's a lot of folks with math and science degree who have STEM backgrounds who are part of that workforce. So really our intellectual capital in Houston is really tied to our immigrant population. And as I think was mentioned before, we're in a period of time in the U.S. right now that's kind of unique, where there's a huge demand for workers. And when we looked at growth rate, what we're starting to see is the growth rate for native-born workers is less than it is for immigrants. And so really this idea that our population is, our growth in Houston, our GDP, is dependent on getting this right, on having more immigrants come to Houston is basically what you can see here. And so we looked at the growth rate of employees over time, and what we found is some interesting things. We found that the growth rate for documented workers is almost 5%, and the growth rate for undocumented workers over the 10-year period that we looked at was about 0.4%. So this idea that people are coming here to work, that was once the case, I think. There were a bunch of people who came here as undocumented workers in the 80s and 90s, but effectively that has really slowed down considerably. And what you're starting to see, as Tatiana talked about at the border, is people coming across really as asylees for persecution. So these sort of trends are kind of interesting, because what we hear on the TV is almost the opposite of this. And so what we did is we took some of this data and then we projected it out. So if you look at what's going to happen if you start projecting some of these trends forward, what you start to see is that immigrants are going to grow from 30% of our workforce to about 43% of our region's jobs. And then on the pie, you can see how that breaks down between documented and undocumented. And so we have about 600, no one really knows the exact number, but about 600,000 undocumented workers in Houston today, about 9% of our workforce. And what we're starting to see, given the growth rates, is that becomes a smaller and smaller part of our workforce, while the documented part of our workforce continues to grow. And so this idea of attracting more high-skilled, more talented people to come to our community is really was going to make our, the industries that we rely on, from healthcare to energy and construction and professional services, that's going to be the source of our growth going forward. So that's kind of what we looked at. We looked at some of the projections on who these workers are, and what industries are going to be dependent on them and who they are, whether they're here as documented or undocumented workers. And then what we did is we played a little bit of a what-if game. We started to look at what would happen if we started to change these immigration patterns. And what we found was some things that are really striking. What we found is that if we were to restrict all immigration by about 30%, we would lose about $51 billion in the Houston region in terms of GDP. So our GDP in 2036 is projected to grow from about $400 billion to about $600 billion. So you can see that this would be almost a 10% reduction in GDP. If we were somehow to deport all undocumented workers, that would also result in a $36 billion loss in GDP. And the difference is the productivity of the undocumented workers tends to be a little less, and so that number is a little bit smaller. But boosting immigration by 30% would grow GDP. So the idea that we are attracting more people to come here has a direct impact on our growth as an economic region. And so it's been interesting as we've done this work. This is going to kind of become the conventional wisdom that a lot of people are starting to see the same impact. And so here is a set of articles from the New York Times, from the Wall Street Journal, from the Brookings Institution, which basically all have resulted in sort of the same conclusion, that if we don't continue to grow our immigrant population, basically our economy is going to stagnate. And that's really I think the thing that we learned as we started to do this work about how immigrants our magnet. Houston's not only a magnet for immigrants, but conversely, it's important to our economic growth that we attract people to come here to be part of our community, to be productive citizens. I have copies of the report if you're interested, or you can download the whole thing on our website. I've really just scratched the surface of what we looked at in the report. We did a bunch of focus groups. We did a kind of a explainer on immigration, so there's quite a lot of interesting material if you want to take a look at it. So that was one piece of work we did. The second piece of work, as I mentioned, is we've worked on a bunch of videos. Short videos are about 5 to 7 minutes long. And the idea of them was to be neither for immigration or pro-immigration, because what we were trying to do is present both sides of the story and let you guys decide what's right. And so we worked with this video production company called The Rational Middle to put these together. And I'm going to show you a short video that just explains how The Rational Middle, how the series works. And then at the end, as I mentioned, I'll have the website on there, and you can go look at some of the actual videos on immigration. So this is about 3 minutes long, and it'll give you a sense of the kind of work that we're trying to do with Rational Middle.
My name is Gregory Kallenberg. I'm the founder and one of the producers at The Rational Middle. 8 years ago, we had the opportunity to do an incredibly important series called The Rational Middle of Energy. Basically, what we saw out there was a discussion about the energy future that was totally uninformed. And what we wanted to do was create balanced films that brought people together to have civil, solutions-based discussions. The Rational Middle does something incredibly special in the sense that it brings together experts who understand both sides of the spectrum. They don't have to all be in agreement in the middle. They just have to be in a place where they can present the information, which lays down a foundation for that discussion, which leads to a solution. We have been touring the Rational Middle of Energy pretty much all over the country. And at the time, we were touring with the World Affairs Council. And I was lucky enough to be down in Houston and have Lauren Steffi, author and the executive producer of The Rational Middle of Immigration, on our panel.
Well, after I met Gregory and actually participated in some Rational Middle of Energy events, I was very impressed at how the format really kind of broke down a lot of the complexity and cut through a lot of the misunderstanding and the arguments that were being thrown around on both sides of the energy issue. And Gregory and I started talking about how that format could be applied to other complex topics. And I sort of said at one point, well, it just so happens I'm working on a book about immigration reform.
And then he asked me, what do you think about doing the Rational Middle of Immigration? And I told him, oh my God, that would be easy. Little did I know, how complicated the issue of immigration is. What's interesting about the rhetoric that's out there right now is each extreme side has their vocabulary, they have what they call each other, they have, the way they describe their arguments. Well, the people in the middle don't have that. They are lacking that ability to communicate what they believe. What the rational of immigration does is it takes that vast majority of people in the middle and we enable them to have facts, but also to create their own dialogue. Where on the extreme sides you have these echo chambers, the middle understands both sides, and they are working to not only understand the complexity of the issue, but the path towards a solution. Rational brings people to a place where they're sitting at a table and they can have that sensible, civil discussion and create compromise that ultimately creates solutions. Because when you look at immigration and how it affects this country, it is one of the most important issues facing the successful future of the United States of America.
So there's the website, and that's what we're trying to do at the center. We're trying to create this dialogue that has a different discussion, that is sort of this new dialogue to immigration. So I look forward to having that discussion with you guys now.
Thank you to Brett. It's nice to have you on this side of the bima for a change. And I'm going to invite our other two speakers to join us up here at the table. We've got microphones for you. And we're going to get started with a question and answer. If you have questions, please write them on the cards, and folks will still be coming around to collect them. We almost definitely won't get to all the questions, but we will do our best to get to as many of them as we can. So I want to start with a question of my own for each of you, which is what I think is beautiful about this panel is that each of you comes to this work for really different reasons, and one of the experiences in listening to folks in our congregation as a part of the work that we've been doing in our social justice work for the last year is hearing a distance sometimes between folks in our community and the stories of immigration that we see on the news. And there are, for sure, lots of people in our congregation who have stories of immigration in their family, who may themselves have been migrants at various points in their lives, and yet there is sometimes this distance. So what I'd love to hear from each of you as a way to sort of start off this question and answer is there a story from your work of an encounter with someone that you find sort of propels your work forward in the various ways that you interact with immigration? If you would tell one story, I think that would move us nicely into some of these questions.
Well, I'm going to tell the story of someone who's not an immigrant but has been very influential in the work that we do. So when I came on to run the center 2.5 years ago, we have a board member, a guy named Stan Merrick. I don't know if anyone knows Stan in the audience, but Stan is incredibly passionate about this issue, and he has been working on this issue really for almost 10 years. And I think he was the one who inspired us to start to think differently about immigration and to try to create this new dialogue on immigration. So he actually wrote a check for almost $500,000 out of his own pocket to fund this series, the videos that I mentioned with the Rational Middle. And so I think I took inspiration from the work that he did and from his passion for this issue. The way he got that passion, and this is a little bit of an advertisement for the center, is through our leadership program. We run a leadership program called Leadership Forum, in which we try to educate people in the community about important issues and then try to motivate them to get involved. And I think Stan is one of our super successful graduates of the program, because he has been, over the course of 10 years, incredibly motivated to try to find a comprehensive solution to this problem.
All right. Okay. Is it on now?
Yes.
All right. This is a hard question, Rabbi, because every day I'm inspired by people who come to, who I meet and try to help. As I explained this simple process somewhat of immigration, people don't know how to navigate the system. It's overwhelming to so many. So I'm just going to pick like a person I saw today, a couple. The woman is born in the United States. She has a master's degree in nursing. Her husband is from Mexico. He came as an undocumented person. Tried to go back to Mexico to get a visa because he heard that they were looking for oyster shuckers, and he was turned down. He was away from his wife and kids, so he came back across the border again. Now, he's after Hurricane Ike, he and his wife bought like a number of properties. They own like 15 or 20 properties in Galveston. They remodeled themselves. I mean, this is to me the energy of immigrants coming to this country. But because he would have come in twice undocumented, he would have a permanent bar that he could never immigrate to the United States. I had to try to figure out how can I find a way to help a decent person, get their paperwork in order. And so we found a case that we're dealing with a person who came in at a border point and was allowed to enter, and we were making an argument that he actually didn't have an undocumented entry. He actually came in, inspected. I'm sorry, this is a long story, but I just wanted to say that I'm motivated every day because I see people who have these stories, that if people did not take time to try to help them, and that we're losing out on so much talent in this country, whether it be high-skilled or low-skilled. And that's just one story. I can go on forever about how much I admire my clients because they had the fortitude to leave their home, come to this country, start again, and they've made a big difference in our community. So that's why I do this work.
I think I'm gonna go also with people who are not immigrants. And those are my grandparents. They're not here. My grandfather taught me with his life to fight for social justice. And my grandmother taught me or teaches me to see past the person who's sitting in front of you. So when I see somebody who's there, I see a human being with their flaws, with their goods, with their dreams and their frustrations. And I think that's what makes me keep going every day.
Thank you all. We're going to try and move through some of these questions that I've gotten on the cards. The first one I'm hoping is a short answer because it's a true-false question, which I wasn't expecting. And it's for Gordon, and it's recent reporting about Trump administration temporarily halted the investment immigration programs, true or false?
False. Okay.
You're allowed to elaborate.
All right. Prior to November 22nd of 2019, the amounts were $1 million for an investment, and if it was in a targeted area, it was $500,000. Now, that law was passed in 1990. So there'd been a lot of discussion saying inflation over the last 30 years, we should increase the amount. So the amounts were increased to $1.8 million in any part of the United States and $900,000 if it's an area where unemployment is at 150% of the national average, or it's a rural area. Now, that has slowed it, but it hasn't stopped it. Honestly, in the last 30 years, we see emerging economies like India and China and so many other parts of the world. There are a lot of millionaires who would like to come to this country. And so while they up the stakes with the coronavirus in China and other places, people still look at America as a good buy. If you want to go to England or Australia, you're looking at 2.5 million, or other countries, it's a lot of money as well. So even though that sounds like a lot of money, it's still something we're still seeing.
Tatiana, there is a question here about Could the UN set up refugee camps either on our southern border or on the Mexican side of the border so that asylum seekers would be safer? But I'd love it if you can also, while answering that question, one of the effects of the Remain in Mexico policy in TPP has been that we are further removed from the stories and experiences of migrants who are encountering our southern border, and we're not seeing those stories in the way that there were protests a year ago or 2 years ago around detention centers. We don't have those protests in part because those folks are now in other countries. So if there are stories you can share from your work about what you're seeing or what your colleagues are seeing in the places where migrants are currently encamped, that would be helpful too.
That's a loaded question. Yes, the UN tried to set up refugee camps, and it doesn't depend only on the UN, it depends also on the Mexican government. Last thing we knew, the Mexican government had refused the UN to come in to set up the refugee camps. So that's that. Another thing is, while these people, and I explained in my presentation that there's a difference between refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants. These people are mostly migrants. For the cases we've seen, most of these people will not qualify either under the law or in any other country, will not qualify for asylum. They're mostly fleeing criminal activities in their country. They're mostly coming for a better life to work in the United States. One of the complaints that I've received, and I don't know if this will answer your question as to the effects of MPP, one of the complaints that I've received is from the people who have lived in the US for a long time and who are undocumented. And they're telling us that we're forgetting about them. We're forgetting the undocumented who already has a house in the US, who's contributed to the community for a long time. From what is happening in Mexico, we do see a lot of insecurity. We do see a lot of danger for them. There's if you go to the RAICES website, there's a lot of videos on what's happening with them. I really like the initiatives that you guys are doing, the rational middle, because I think there's a lot of misinformation into what is happening, right? Of course, there's a lot of people suffering at the border. But we could use a rational middle to solve this problem. Yes.
So speaking of Brett and you're solving the problem, this question's a big swing, but I'm going to ask it anyway because we like big swings here in religion. That's what we do. What is the ideal immigration policy? And while this was phrased for Brett, yeah, right? So I warned you. While this was phrased for Brett, to the extent that either of the other two of you would like to weigh in on, or what are the changes you would like to see happen in immigration policy based on the work that you do with the clients you serve?
So actually, like a lot of intractable problems, the solutions are known as really the political will that's missing to solve the problem. And so I think we sort of know what needs to happen. We need a solution for the undocumented. There's a proposal that, as I mentioned, Stan Merrick has called, he's come up with this proposal called Tax and ID, the idea that we ought to effectively legalize people's status, but not necessarily give them a path to citizenship. So that might be one possible solution for the undocumented. So that's one piece of it. We need to address the needs for legal immigrants. And Gordon gave you some of the details on that. Can we meet our labor needs? Are there ways to do that? There's a number of different ways we could do that, and there's not sort of a right or wrong answer there. And then the third thing that we need to do, obviously, is we need to solve our issues with border security. And so really what you're having today is you're having two discussions that are disconnected. You're having one discussion really focused on what's going on at the border and how much of that needs to be addressed before we have comprehensive immigration reform. And then you're having another discussion about the undocumented and perhaps legal immigration. What we need to do is address all these problems simultaneously. And there are proposals out there for bills around comprehensive immigration reform to start thinking about those sorts of issues. I just noted the other day, I didn't read the article, maybe one of you guys did. I think Jared Kushner now has sort of started to take this once again after a year and started to throw this idea out there. So it's not inconceivable that either, perhaps after the election, that there might be, irrespective of who wins, some impetus for some sort of immigration reform that addresses all these aspects of the problem. And so I think, again, it's a problem that we know how to solve. We just don't have the political will to solve it.
And I'd second that. I look back to the Gang of Eight's work in 2013. It passed the Senate. You may remember that bill, Marco Rubio, and it was a bipartisan group of 8 senators. And it looked at both high skill and low skill and agricultural workers, looked at the backlogs and how we reduce the backlogs, how we maybe trim some of the family categories, like maybe brothers and sisters. We don't allow that because it's such a long waiting line, but grandfather those people to at least let them process through the system to get them out because they've been waiting so long. Maybe married sons and daughters, we don't have them as well. Maybe put more emphasis on employment-based. There was, as Brent mentions, there were very meaningful discussions. It passed in a bipartisan way with, I think, 66 senators in the Senate. It would have passed the House, but they just did not bring it up. And the Liberty Caucus or Freedom Caucus, whatever it was, blocked it coming to the floor of the House. Republicans and Democrats both would have voted it out, and Obama would have signed that. But the political will is the thing that's stopping it. I had a chance to work with the Hillary Clinton campaign. This was going to be one of the first things she did within that 100 days that if she had been elected. So we were looking at something similar to that Gang of Eight proposal. So there are a lot of plans out there. It can be tackled. It's the political will to get it done.
2 questions, in part I think that touch on a little bit what Gordon and Tatiana, especially Tatiana, talked about, that I'll sort of combine into one in thinking about sort of the narratives we hear in the media and wanting to check in about how much of that is accurate. One is about, can you share some about unaccompanied minors that are crossing the border and how the policies we've described apply to them, and how much is that an issue? And also, we hear a lot on the media coming about Central and South American immigration. And Tatiana, you talked about folks from Africa and other places that maybe aren't a part of the way we sort of picture the migrant crisis. Can you help expand a little bit on that?
Okay. I need to make a disclaimer before unaccompanied minors are not the population that I work the most. I do know that they're allowed to come in to the United States. Processes, if you are a minor, once you are in custody of the United States government, they do have the responsibility towards this minor, and they have to protect the minor. So they're most of the time placed in a shelter, and they try to locate a family member or a friend who will take care of them. I was reading recently that apparently there's been reports of people or minors who have been sent back to Mexico. I cannot confirm or deny that, I don't know. As far as I know, they're being placed in detention centers or shelters for minors. As to Central American and South American immigration?
So broadening, you mentioned also Africa. Can you broaden a little bit? Can you broaden a little bit for us sort of how we should be thinking about the migrants who are a part of the migrant crisis?
So within the population that we're seeing, 3 groups are really strong there. We're seeing Venezuelans, we're seeing Cubans, we're seeing Central Americans, people from Guatemala, El Salvador, or the Northern Triangle, right? Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. We're seeing a lot of, or some people from Nicaragua, but we're also seeing people from Eritrea. We recently had a client from Morocco, and these are people that are usually coming to the United States, but we don't see them on the media. I don't know how familiar you are with the situation in Eritrea. They've been at war, basically, or they have a dictatorship for the past 30 years, I want to say. And these people have been or to-go refugees, right? They, if they're sent back to their countries, they're killed there. Just because the government has a policy, if you leave and you try to apply for asylum, you cannot come back, you will be killed. As of November, the United States government has been sending them back to Eritrea. Right? It's pretty hard for us, yes.
If I could add, what happened under the Clinton administration, there was a lawsuit against the government because of unaccompanied minors. And there was a settlement called the Flores Settlement. Trump refers that as a terrible settlement. Judge Dolly G. Of the Southern District of California ordered that you had to place these minors within 72 hours, and that you looked at, there was a listing of if it's a parent who can take care of them, if it's a relative who can take care of them, it's a friend that's a stable home, a good environment, an agency that can take care of them. So there was a listing that you checked off as to where you would place this minor. The Trump administration decided they didn't believe in the Flores settlement. They were just going to detain these individuals as well as their parents, and then they started separating the parents from the kids. So it became a big mess, and they've been held in contempt of that settlement. So that's what you've seen in the paper, all these kids being taken away from their parents. There was a protocol in place that they just didn't want to follow anymore.
So I want to ask one more question of all three of you, and then I have a few concluding thoughts. And this question, I think, is beautifully phrased, but I want to broaden it to apply to all three of you, which is, what can I, as a Houstonian, as a congregant of Emmanuel, and as a willing individual do to assist? If you could each give us maybe one suggestion from each of you. There are people in this room who are desperate to feel less powerless and more powerful in this work. One suggestion of a way for folks to think about how they might make a difference.
Well, it's really very basic. Just make your voice heard. Our two senators are really key, and particularly Senator Cornyn are key players in this immigration debate. And so immigration matters more to Texas than almost anywhere in the country. And if there is going to be a solution, it's going to be because our congressional delegation, both our senators and our representatives, start to drive the discussion. So you in the audience are uniquely situated living here in Houston and in the state of Texas to have a disproportionate impact on this debate. And so simply making your voice heard is a way to start moving the needle, not only with our own representatives, but nationally.
I will add to that you can volunteer. Last year we made an agreement with an organization or with a group of mental health experts, and they're volunteering their time to work with our crime victims and our asylum seekers. And they're providing pro bono therapy to our clients. So there's a lot of opportunities for volunteering.
You know, I want something concrete that you can do, and unfortunately, it may take some effort on anybody's part. We have right now in Houston thousands of people under temporary protected status from El Salvador and Honduras and other countries that can work legally. We have thousands who are under DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. These are people who have skills. As I've said in my presentation, there's a shortage of workers. If you had employers who would be willing to sponsor these people, and I see Laurie there, and I know what I've tried to reach out to HISD. They have a number of teachers who are on DACA. They have a shortage of teachers. Sponsor those DACA people and make them permanent residents. I think that as a lack of knowledge of what's involved, I was at one church gathering, And okay, I'm not going to just pick on her, but Sheila Jackson Lee was there, and she was saying, I'm going to fight for DACA. I'm going to get Congress to forget Congress right now. I think they're not going to do anything. But you, as an individual, can make a difference. And implore you, I mean, it's like taking something out of your time and effort, but it can change a person and a family's life and history.
I'm going to wrap up from here because, frankly, I feel more comfortable here. I'm just more used to it. One other answer to the question, what can you do to be involved? Congregation Emmanuel is a part of an organization called the Religious Action Center of Texas, or RAC Texas, under the wonderful leadership of Rabbi David Siegel, who is here, and I'm now making wave. Yes, excellent. And part of the strategy around a campaign this year for RAC Texas is disrupting what organizers call the arrest to deportation pipeline. There is a significant connection between folks who may be undocumented, who have interactions with the legal system, with the police, who are stopped for minor traffic violations and things like that, and then quickly find themselves in the immigration system and the deportation system. And there are a whole host of strategies around how we might think about disrupting or slowing down that process. And that is taking different forms in different parts of the state of Texas. And in Houston, one of the projects that we are working on is around creating a legal defense fund for folks in immigration detention. A painfully small amount of folks in immigration detention have legal representation, and other municipalities around the country have thought about how to apply public funds to make sure that everyone in America receives the right to representation. And so if that campaign is something that's interesting to you, and as a way of getting involved through the congregation's work, I'd invite you at the dessert that we'll go to in just a minute to talk to me, to talk to Rabbi Siegel, or to talk to Freddie Bleeker-Franks, who is on our research team for that as well. But the congregation is helping RAC Texas to engage in that work here locally. I want to conclude first in gratitude, first and foremost to our speakers, to Brett, Tatiana, and Gordon, for sharing so much of yourselves and so much of your experience, and for being here with us on a Thursday night. And we are so grateful for the opportunity to learn from you. They may or may not have to run out, and I don't want to volunteer them for things they didn't sign up for, but if people continue to have questions, we did not get to all the questions, you may be able to catch them for a moment to take them up on the opportunities to help that each of them shared. And I want to thank the representatives from our brotherhood and sisterhood, Andrew and Carol Sue and Claire and Freddie, who really put this program together, came to me many months ago and said, we want to do something about immigration. And at first it was just a word, and as we began to develop from more than a word into something that I hope has been impactful for you as it has been for me. And I want to just close with the thought in this week's Torah portion, in this week's reading from the Bible that we will do on our Sabbath on tomorrow night and Saturday morning, we will read the giving of the Ten Commandments and the beginning of the relationship that the ancient Israelites had with law. And the law that they are given is revolutionary in the history of the world, because it was the first time that a law like that was given that applied not only to the people it was given. In the Ten Commandments, we get the commandment for Shabbat, and the commandment for Shabbat says that not only should you rest on Shabbat, but even the people who work for you, the people who work in your household, even the slaves that you own. And it's a complicated story about why Israelites would own slaves, but Shabbat applies to them as well. If we're thinking about things like legal defense funds, it's because we have an understanding that we share with our Jewish roots that the laws and the rights that apply to some should apply to all, and that justice should apply to everyone, and that when there are any people in a society experiencing injustice, that's injustice that infects the whole society. And that understanding is deeply rooted in our religious tradition, deeply rooted in an understanding of a Judaism that extends the benefits of justice to everyone in society, and most especially the vulnerable, and most especially the immigrant and the stranger. And so I want to thank you for being here tonight to engage in this deeply Jewish, deeply sacred, deeply meaningful work, to engage in these difficult conversations that ask us to humble ourselves and to admit that there's a lot that we don't yet know. And if anything has come out of this for me tonight, it's a sense of how much I still have yet to learn. And I want to thank you for the work that you're going to do in the ways that you heard our speakers describe, through RAC Texas, through the congregation, through pushing the clergy to do more, to do better as a congregation, because this is the crisis of our times, and our ability to respond to it is going to shape who we are and how we're able to tell our children and our grandchildren who we were in this moment. So thank you for being with us tonight. We want to invite you to join us for dessert in the North Lobby, in the North Foyer, immediately following. Thank you all so much for being here.